Hello, dear ones. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for Mindful Compassion Hour, our Compassionate Relationship with Suffering series, a six-session offering through the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation in partnership with Engaging Mindfulness, Forging Meaning. The mission of the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation is to establish optimal quality of life in the Northwest Parkinson's community through awareness, education, advocacy, and care. My name is Barcha Wachtel, and I'm a licensed independent clinical social worker, mental health therapist, and a mindful self-compassion trained teacher through the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion at University of California, San Diego. My private practice is called Engaging Mindfulness Forging Meaning, or EMFM for short. The mission of EMFM is to engage people of diverse identities and abilities in cultivating wise attention, deep meaning, and fiercely compassionate ways of being as the foundations for transformation, interconnection, and well-being. You can find out more about my therapy practice and mindfulness-based programs at www.emfm.space. The Compassionate Relationship with Suffering series is a six-session online presentation designed to support people living with chronic conditions and their caregivers in the basic practices of compassion, both toward themselves and towards others. These practices are based in psychological and neuroscience research, as well as what is called the Buddhist psychology, which have been found to support us in being with and responding to difficult moments in our lives with kindness, care, and understanding. Additionally, compassion practices are strongly correlated with improved physical and emotional well-being outcomes. These free classes are always available through the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation website at nwpf.org. And you will find all previous Mindful Compassion Hour series on their website as well. So EMFM provides support and education for those impacted by ongoing mental health challenges in personal, social, and professional life through professionally facilitated educational seminars. Although the information and support provided can be psychoeducational in nature, these seminars are not counseling, nor are they therapy groups, and EMFM is not providing healthcare services. You should not use the information contained herein for diagnosing or treating any health condition. Participation in EMFM and WPF seminars do not create a psychotherapist-patient relationship, and you should always consult with a medical and or mental health professional for medical or mental health care advice or information about diagnosis and treatment. By viewing and engaging in this seminar, you're acknowledging and agreeing that if you feel uncomfortable in any way, you have the right and the responsibility to disengage from any practice at any time, as well as in disengaging from the seminar as a whole. So this is just a little bit about me. I'm not going to go into detail about this because you can read for yourself, but I'm a big neuroscience nerd. I've been in practice since the early 2000s with my master's in social work. Previous to that, I did undergraduate professional work with hospice as well as children, youth, and families. And then I've been working for about 14 years with elders and non-dominant abled persons living with chronic and terminal disease, with a particular specialty around neurological conditions, people living with early onset dementia, Alzheimer's, as well as Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and a specialty in amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease by other names. And I've been a licensed independent clinical social worker since 2005. In that training period before you actually get your full supervision completed for licensure. So these are just disclosures about my organizational relationships. This is just to make sure that I'm being upfront about my financial ties and relationships with organizations, and I'm not trying to sell anyone anything other than the free resources and education that I'm doing here through the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation. So we provide these in order for it to be free to people, but it's also helpful to know that if I am saying something, that I'm being ethically accountable if I'm pushing in a particular direction. So this helps to keep me honest as well. So just to make it clear, any opinions and information presented here do not reflect those of any of the above organizations, as well as the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation. And I am the sole responsible party under EMFM for the information presented here today. So a little bit about religion, just to start out, because inevitably this comes up every time I speak, and I want to treat this with a tremendous sense of love and kindness and generosity. And again, in that sense of ethics, that I'm being upfront with people. So you'll hear me likely several times through the talk and seminar and practices using this word Buddhism or Buddhist psychology. And this was feedback that I got from speaking engagement that I did, mainly to a group of caregivers for people with Alzheimer's. And what I really want to make clear is that the way that I view the Buddhist psychology is really in the same way that you would view science. Science comes out of a particular view or history that maybe certain religious aspects or things were going on at that time, but there are basic provable things that move through certain traditions that then we can apply to everyday life and provide a structure so that whatever your spirituality, whatever your religion is, that you have the capacity to be able to apply your religion, spirituality, or if you're an atheist, your basic values and what is meaningful to you into the structures of Buddhist practice. And so it's not about believing in a particular God or believing about a particular kind of concept. And I'll get a little bit more into detail about this, but it's what the Buddhist psychology is this modern day, what we call contemplative neuroscience, which I'll cover here in a moment. But we're just looking at what provides the greatest sense of health and well-being for individuals in an internal practice of how we practice our relationship to ourselves and with others with a sense of awareness and understanding. So if these concepts and structures had come out of Islam or Christianity or Judaism, and I'm not saying that there aren't aspects of those there, but I would be talking about the secular Jewish psychology or Christian psychology or Muslim psychology. So it's not meant to be exclusionary. It's just a matter that Buddhism in particular became very interested in its early origins in our basic understanding of awareness and emotions and thoughts. And this is a little bit of a different focus than most other psychologies, rather than viewing it as religion. And so I view it much more as a secular kind of practice. And that also allows me to work with people of different religious backgrounds, practices, and spiritualities so that I can support them in a structure that's going to work for them from their values, their traditions, and their rituals. So this isn't meant to disregard anyone or a particular belief system, but I know that among a lot of people who have a very strong and kind of more maybe inflexible kind of view within their spirituality, and I understand there are people that have that, this may not be the spot for you, but I would hope that people would give it a try and see what might be helpful. All right, so contemplative neuroscience. What we're really looking at here is the study of what happens in the lab when we bring human beings in and notice what happens to their brain, to their body, to their experience when they pay attention to what's going on in a particular way. And so contemplative neuroscience and the research study, they bring people in and under fMRI, brainwave kind of things, and studies of stress hormones and all of that. They look at what happens to people when they pay attention in a particular way. So this falls into three main areas. First, we're looking at neuroplasticity. It's the capacity of our neurophysiology, so not just our brain, but also our body, to shift and change and be shaped by the experiences that we have. The other thing is that in this shaping, our neurons shift and change, but also we do over the course of our life produce new neurons that then thicken in certain parts of the brain or can become can degenerate in the brain in response to our pessimism or optimism or our sense of being completely unaware and disengaged, what I call being in fight, flight, or freeze response, our threat defense system, or if we're more in the present moment awareness, as well as a sense of connection with ourselves and others, and how kind or loving we are towards ourselves and others. The second area of research is around epigenetics, and this looks at how our experiences, behaviors, lifestyle, and attitudes kind of begin to dim down or amplify certain genetic expressions in our body. So upregulation is primarily referring to the upregulation of disease processes by which genes get turned on that then start things like cancer or neurodegeneration, um, or other kinds of, like, this could even apply to like depression or anxiety as disease processes. And then downregulation would be when we engage in more kind of optimistic, supportive, nurturing, self-care kind of behaviors in taking good care of ourselves. And then that helps to downregulate gene expression around these disease processes. Now, I want to be really clear. I'm not blaming anyone for the diseases that end up showing up in life. It's not your fault. This is a part of being human. And so that part of being human means that we naturally have normal human responses from an evolutionary standpoint that allow us to react to situations that we perceive as being dangerous. And I'll get more into this, but that really gets us into this space of constantly being in a state of stress. And then that naturally puts us more at being vulnerable to diseases that might show up or in our genetic lines with our families or ancestors. The third area is really around this telomeres. These are the ends of our chromosomes. They're kind of like these little strings that kind of are at the end of our chromosomes, the bundles of our genetic material. And so as we get older and as we get super stressed out, these telomeres get shorter and shorter. And that is an indicator of aging at the cellular level and longevity. And you can see sometimes some people who live a really, really hard life because of the history of the families that they were raised in or the way that they lived their life in the moment. And again, we all fall into this unawares. But you can see how that can make maybe people look a lot older than they actually are, or we start feeling much more kind of sick in our body over time. And so what the research has found is that as we look at people who do particular meditation practices, that those telomeres tend to either get longer or remain longer or slow their shortening over time. And so there's something very connected to this sense of like decreasing basic stress hormones. And that creates an environment where we don't have as much of this genetic expression. We have of disease, and we don't have as much trauma and wear and tear on the brain. And these telomeres are not getting shorter. So that's the basic foundation of the Buddhist psychology and this contemplative neuroscience. So what else? Like particularly around compassion, and my area of practice is primarily around supporting people in being more compassionate towards themselves. How does this help me? You know, if I engage in these practices, what is it that actually going to mean? So beyond the biological aspects that I was just talking about, there are often natural kind of judgments that we have against people, including ourselves, if we try to engage in being loving or compassionate towards ourselves. And these are normal as well. This is primarily based on the research of Paul Gilbert, who developed compassion-focused therapy out of Great Britain. And what he found was that when you present people, and this shows up with my patients and with my students, is when I present to them the possibility of being kind and loving, that these judgments show up. We have this natural suspicion and aversion to being kind and loving for a lot of different reasons that have to do with our self-protective mechanisms, the threat defense system that tries to keep us safe. So one of the first things is around self-pity of like, I'll just be this big pity party if I engage in being loving to myself or kind. That might make me seem weak, like, strength is not necessarily associated in our modern society with being loving or kind, or somehow I might be selfish, that I'm just making excuses, or being in this kind of experience of everything is for me and forget everyone else. Self-indulgence, making excuses, or that it undermines our motivation, that somehow if I'm not hard on myself, that means that I'm somehow going to become unmotivated to do the things that I need to do. So the good news is that in the research, for people who have mindful, compassionate qualities, aspects of their personality, as well as those who go through a training program or therapy, um, practicing mindfulness and compassion, that the outcomes actually show that people, rather than being self-pitying, become more likely to engage in perspective taking and realizing that they're not alone. So there's this kind of connectivity that begins to happen when we practice. We're also better able to cope through tough situations. There's been quite a bit of research around divorce, trauma, chronic pain. They're using compassion in the Buddhist psychology a lot, and trauma resources for veterans in the military, as well as beginning to move into the military itself, of helping people with this sense of, rather than falling apart when we are in these demoralizing situations like being in a pandemic, trauma and chronic pain, that this allows us to have this sense of post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress in our body. The other thing is, rather than selfishness, we tend to be more caring and supportive, to compromise and to be compassionate towards people, even that we disagree with. And so there's this greater sense of being able to move into support and listening rather than being constantly defensive. Rather than self-indulgence, the research shows that we engage in healthier behaviors like exercise, nutrition, engaging in regular healthcare appointments. There's an increase in that in the research for people with these traits, as well as decreasing cravings for those who are concerned about eating habits or drug and alcohol issues. Rather than making excuses, what mindful self-compassion tends to do is create a greater sense of personal responsibility for our actions, to actually apologize and be able to move into states of forgiveness in what we can. And that doesn't mean forgetting, that doesn't mean condoning behavior, but we're able to take responsibility for what we can and call people into taking responsibility for their part. So there's this tremendous sense of equality that begins to show up around the practices in our relationships. And rather than undermining our motivation, we tend to have higher personal standards. We're less afraid of failure, and we tend to persist in trying. The thing that I like to remind people around this in a practicality kind of way is thinking about a person in your life story who was the most hard on you, kind of verbally abusive a little bit and really rough with you, and just kind of asking yourself, did that person help me moving forward in my life? Right. And some of that may be true, that it helped us to move through a little bit. But now I want you to think about the person who was kind and loving and supportive to you in ways that really made you feel safe, and thinking about how that motivated you. Right. So we can begin to think about that in terms of, what kind of internal relationship do I want to have with myself that might be supportive or nurturing, or if being rough on myself is actually more helpful. The research actually shows that that greater sense of relaxation and support in the body through practice actually helps us to move forward much more easily in life. And it doesn't mean that we can't move through life if we're hard on ourselves. It just means that people tend to have a better quality of life and be much happier if we're able to be a little bit more kind. So details of what we're actually here for. The first thing is that we're here to practice. So this is the cultivation of awareness of not just what our mind is doing, but also what the mind and body together are doing in each given moment. Our sense of well-being and a sense of connection, again, to ourselves and to others. As I mentioned before about talking about religion and spirituality and values, The practices within the Buddhist psychology are meant to center in living your core values, not mine. So there's nothing that you have to reject or accept. You just apply what's important to you, and then you practice those in the mind, particularly around what we call the ethics practices. So generally, people aren't going to have a big protest within being introduced to the practices, because these core values tend to center around love and compassion, kindness, peace, love of learning, a sense of enthusiasm for life, forgiveness. So they tend to be these really lovely things. So unless that's not a part of your spirituality or religion, then there's nothing here that you have to worry about as far as accepting or rejecting anything. It's okay always to start at the very beginning every time. So when we have even the perception of making a mistake or failure, we just notice that that happens, and then you get to go back to the beginning and start again. It's a really lovely practice. There's kind of an underlying practice of forgiveness in that, of like, oh, I made a mistake. And so then it's okay for me to go back to the beginning once again. So you can let go of being the expert. Just allow yourself to be in that beginner's mind, that it's okay to learn just like the first time you learned how to ride on a bike. It's also about allowing this sense of balanced awareness in this moment, the only moment that we have. And it's not about making something happen. Often when I'm out in public or meeting people, and they find out what I do, they're like, oh, I need mindfulness, but you know what? I can't make my mind stop, racing. I can't make myself disengage. I can't make my body sit still and constantly moving. And I know that comes up a lot when I speak with people who are living with Parkinson's in particular, of like, my body isn't cooperating in the way that I want. The lovely thing about that is we just allow you to show up with the mind that you have, and it can be busy and moving and thinking all over the place, and your body can be moving as well. You don't have to like make that sit still. And what we're doing is we're just being with that experience. So in the end, we're just testing this out, being our own best scientist and seeing what happens in truth when we engage in practices, if it's helpful to us. So what are we here for around this idea that you've heard me mention periodically? It's the idea of intention. So we practice compassion not to make our suffering go away, because suffering is a part of life. No one will get through life without experiencing something in the pain of being born into the world, of the sickness, illnesses, and diseases that we gather along our pathway through life, as well as the pain and suffering of entering into the final stage of our life, preparing for death and dying. And also in relationships, we don't have the capacity to really stop the pain and suffering of connection and disconnection. So we offer ourselves suffering because we are suffering, not to try to make the suffering go away. But within that, we're working with this sense of the intention behind how we relate to ourselves. And Chris Germer, one of my favorite teachers, he's based out of Harvard Medical School, in the psychology department there. And he says that mindfulness is a special relationship with suffering. So we're engaging this sense of like what we want our intention to be toward our suffering and experience. And so the basic intention is just compassion or kindness, but we can cultivate a lot of different kinds of intentions that might be helpful to us in particular situations. So what might happen when we practice? So the first thing is that there are three types of emotions that we tend to feel, and those are pleasant, neutral, and unpleasant. So I'm not as much concerned about pleasant and neutral, but just along those, that recognition of disengaging from practices if you get overwhelmed or feel uncomfortable in any way. The unpleasant emotions sometimes will show up. When in fight, flight, or freeze, that threat defense system response, we often shut down or run away from or fight experiences that we've had in our past. And we've never really actually opened up to them to be like, what would it be like to be kind and gentle to these experiences? So when we come across them and actually open up to them, sometimes we might experience anger or anxiety or tears. And in psychology, we actually call this backdraft. So it's this kind of rushing of emotion that shows up. In therapy, it actually means that clients are making progress. So we want you to experience that in therapy. In a class, we don't so much want you to do that. We want you to generally, when we think about experiences, we want you to be in this 3 to 4 range of thinking about difficulties that you're working with, so that you can get in good practice, just like training wheels, right? We don't take the wheels off right away. We want you to be in a space of feeling a sense of connection to yourself at the level that feels safe to do that. And so if tears do show up, that's fine. And if you can stick with it, that's fine. That's totally up to you. But if it becomes overwhelming in any way, I want you to seek support, all right? And you're always welcome to reach out through the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation, to get a message to me. Um, or my email address is on the very first slide when we started the practice. So within our experience, essentially, we have two kind of ways of relating, and then there's a spectrum in between. We have this tendency throughout our day, our week, our years to kind of open and to close, opening and closing. And so when we're open, it's kind of like we're saying, yes, this feels really good. I feel really open to this. And a lot of extroverts tend to feel this a lot more than, say, introverts. But we tend to be really attentive, leaning in and sharing. And and it just is this big yes of like, this is exactly what I needed. Then we go through times where we feel really closed off, very self-protective. We're kind of defensive or maybe sleepy. We're kind of checking out or distracted or overwhelmed. And sometimes we're kind of in these in-between spaces where we're kind of like cautious of like, I don't know if I need to be closed, or I don't know if it's okay to be completely open, but I want to. So all of that space in between is okay wherever you are. I can't see you. And so you're not going to offend me if you have to leave or get up or close off or say, I'm just going to watch this practice rather than engage. So I want you to pay attention to the normalcy of all of our humanity that shows up in these experiences. And that's what we're really learning how to do, is how to be with them and to take good care of ourselves. And sometimes that means leaning in. Sometimes that means leaning out or getting up and walking away. And all of that is okay, even in the practice of learning about the practices. All right, so how can we engage in immediate self-care in the moment that we're practicing? So the first thing is, just in this moment, I just want you to take a deep inhalation and then just gently let it go. Again. And then nice and slow out through the mouth. And one more time. And then nice and slow out through the mouth. And so when you're starting to feel overwhelmed, a good thing in immediate self-care is just hyper-focusing on the breath and doing very deliberate in and out breaths. And I won't get into the neurochemical process that goes on when you do this, but it's really good for you. And so it helps slow down the heart. There are all kinds of neurotransmitters that get released in the body, especially on the exhalation. And so it's still just a way of kind of settling the heart and body to kind of slow down. And so you can do something like that for just a few breaths. You might feel lightheaded if you do it longer than 3 breaths. And you can notice a little bit of how it feels in the body, to just take those 3 breaths, kind of what it feels like. And all along, we're really asking, what does my body or my emotions need in this moment? So we're kind of asking, just like we would for a friend, but toward ourselves, of saying, how do you need me to be with you in this moment that might be helpful or supportive to you? And then we're saying, hey, if you just take a few breaths with me. And so we're kind of prompting ourselves in awareness to say, what do I need? The other thing is to just in this moment, kind of tap your fingers with your thumbs, just kind of noticing what that feels like. Or just gently rubbing. If you want to be more close to the body, you can kind of tap or rub your hands over the heart or over the chest. Just feeling the fingertips, perhaps the warmth between the contact with the body. And then placing your awareness into your feet as well. wiggling the toes, noticing where the feet are resting, feeling a sense of connection there. The heels, the soles of the feet. So this grounding awareness in the extremities tends to soothe the emotions. So our emotion centers tend to be in the body, primarily through the core of the body, the midline. So the main innervations of nerves that come in through the brainstem and into the body mainly innervate into the face, the throat, the heart, and the stomach. So when we feel a jarring emotion that comes along, like often sadness has its own kind of heaviness, we'll feel a pit in the stomach, or we might feel through anxiety, pressure, or kind of racing in the chest. We might feel choked up if we feel sad or grieved, or if we're embarrassed or angry, right? Then we're going to feel this heat in the face. So getting into the extremities can help cool down that response, that reactivity in the body. And then we can respond with intention of just being good to ourselves by placing awareness in the extremities. The hands or the feet are the best places to go for that. And that gets us away from that activity in the mid part of the body. If you do want to attend to it in the moment, it does really good things for your body to place direct contact, hand, heart, or stomach, or even onto the face, or giving yourself a hug. All of those things, when we do those things with others, release all these lovely neurochemicals into the body. Painkillers, oxytocin, which help us to bond and create connections with people. It gives us this kind of warm, fuzzy feeling. So you can do that with yourself. So that's a lovely way to use the natural pharmacy of your body to help support you through difficult times. The other thing is I'm going to make a sound with a meditation bowl here. And this is my meditation bowl. And I just want to have you close your eyes for just a moment, and then I'm just going to ring this and just listen to the sounds in the room. So now just noticing how you feel in the body, just for a moment. All right. So part of the challenge that's going on within our system is that we have this mind wandering that we do as human beings. So I won't get into detail with this, but essentially we spend 46.9% of our daily waking moment thinking about the future, thinking about the past. Rarely less than 30% of our time, and even 10% in this particular study happened when people were having sex. So that's an interesting experience of kind of interrupting, saying, wait a minute, and let's get on this app and let people know. So they were asking these questions. This was out of Harvard University, Killingsworth and Gilbert, of looking at 2,250 individuals between the ages of 18 and 88. What are you doing? What are you paying attention to? And are you thinking about positive or negative things? And then are you happy? And in general, we're not happy when we're thinking about the future or the past, even often if it's pleasant experiences. But when we're in the present moment, there's this experience that happens that's very different than that. So this part of the brain that does this is called the default mode network. So the first rule of mindfulness in the Buddhist psychology is that the mind will wander. This is what we do. And that this wandering mind has a negativity bias. It wants to think about all the problems and threats that are going on in life. But in modern society, we really don't have a lot of physical threats going on as far as predators. So this default mode network, and this is out of research of Reichley from 2001, a neuroscientist who stuck people in a room to see what the mind would do under fMRI, what parts of the brain lit up. And so mid-prefrontal lobe, judgment, decision-making, personality, the midline structures through the brain, and then back to the memory centers in the back of the brain. So this part of these parts of the brain do three things in succession. The first thing that they do is they create this kind of ego, this sense of self, that is really not who we are, but it's an idea that we've created in our mind about who we are. And then it takes this self and it projects it into the future and into the past. And then the third thing that it does is thinks about problems. So it's kind of like if I sat here and complained to you for an hour, you're going to feel a certain way about that, right? So you could even think about in this moment, like thinking about one of the worst days of your life and just noticing how that feels in the body, right? So just bringing that up, I just changed everyone's physiology. And then secondly, I want you to think about something really beautiful and meaningful that you've had, maybe an experience of awe, an experience of connection or happiness or meaning, and just think about that for a moment. Right, and now notice how that feels in the body. Did you notice that shift? There was that drop of thinking about the painful experience. And then we thought about the meaningful, beautiful experience. You felt this kind of lightening or maybe openness in the body. So that's the power of the mind to just by paying attention to things in a particular way or what we're paying attention to can really make a big difference in the way that we feel. So mindfulness at its core, the ancient Pali word for mindfulness was called bhavana. And what that literally meant was cultivation. So it's kind of like planting seeds. And again, that idea of beginner's mind, of we don't just get on the bike and suddenly know how to ride a bike when we're 3 or 4 years old or 5. You know, we're not going to be an expert. You have to plant those seeds and then over time get our training wheels off and then we're learning how to ride. So it's this cultivation over time of awareness. So, but the neuroscience defines it in a very special way, and that's paying attention to what's happening while it's happening with acceptance or non-judgment. So you're noticing there's this lack of reactivity. So we're not engaging in reactivity. We're learning how to notice our reactivity and then staying with it with acceptance and non-judgment. And then this other capacity that we have as human beings is the awareness of awareness. So as human beings, not only are we aware of our surroundings and what's going on, but we're aware that we are thinking or even that we're paying attention in a particular way. So I could be here with you and just like the unpleasant thought, I could be relating to you and paying attention in an unhelpful way that might be reactive, right? I'm out of intention and just into reactivity. So I'm very like, hi, my name is Barcha. It's really nice to meet you. So even though I was just acting, notice how that even started to feel in your body of me pretending to be anxious or fearful, right? That's contagious. It's very contagious. So now I want you to notice, hey, Barcha, glad to be here. Welcome. Right. And so now notice in that experience, it feels like for me to be disconnected and disinterested or even aloof, right? That feels a particular way in the body. And hopefully you're picking out that the way that I naturally relate is with a sense of kindness and love. That's my practice. That's who I like to be as a human being. And to a certain degree, I valued that as a very young person. So, but through mindfulness, we practice this awareness of awareness that is our intention in any given moment, of regardless of how we feel, that I'm practicing a sense of warmth. If I value warmth, I will practice this. If I value love, I will begin to practice a sense of relating and being aware with a sense of love or peaceful or open. Or sometimes I need to be fierce and set limits, that it's okay to be aware and to say, you can't treat me like that anymore, or you can't talk to me like that anymore. So this is that sense of mindfulness. This is what we mean when we're talking about mindfulness. The second thing is this idea of compassion, of like, where does that come from? So compassion is an evolutionary process in which we become aware of vulnerable offspring. We're one of the only species on the earth where we have this long gestational period. as human beings, that we come into the world, we can't feed ourselves, we can't take good care of ourselves, we can't communicate. So we have these kind of ways of relating that when we come into the world, we're screaming and yelling, and we're likely experiencing quite a bit of pain. And our mothers did as well. And then we engage in these attachment related behaviors around being picked up and rocked and cooed at, right? This kind of gentle vocalization, soothing touch. And then there's this hormone release that happens between us. So this compassion is what allows us to survive, right? And so it evolved for allowing us to take care of our vulnerable offspring, if I can say it, this sexual selection of hopefully finding partners who are loving and kind and gentle and can take care of us and take care of us within community in an equal kind of way. And then our non-kin relationships, that we have these enduring friendships and communities and cities that we live in, and we live together for a reason around this sense of gratitude and agreeability and cooperation. And that's our sense of compassion. And this is based out of the research of Jennifer Goetz and her supervisor, Dr. Keltner, who is out of UC Berkeley. All right. So let's get into some practice. So we're going to practice an informal practice called mindful self-compassion break. But just to define self-compassion and compassion in general really quickly, mindfulness is engaging in that sense of awareness and being aware of how we're being aware. So I might acknowledge an emotion in a kind and gentle way, right? So I'm paying attention to the emotion, and my intention is to be gentle or warm behind it, right? So we're engaging the heart and mind in the awareness of suffering, either that of another person or towards ourselves. And then the secondary thing that makes compassion what it is, and mindfulness is this empathy. Empathy is not compassion in and of itself. It just gets us in the door. We have to emotionally resonate with ourselves or with others in order to really be able to do anything about it, right? If we just stay there, we can just burn out on feeling difficult emotions and people suffering. So we need more than that. So moving into common humanity, it's this recognition of the greater universality of suffering, that all human beings suffer and that we're not alone. We're all in this together, just like with the pandemic going on, that we're in this together. And the third thing is this sense of kindness or self-kindness, that we don't just stop with mindfulness and empathy, that then we respond with kind words, a gentle touch, a way of giving of ourselves through listening, or maybe through giving a gift or monetary, all of these ways of relating in warmth, love, kindness, care, peaceful, balanced. And that can be our intention in the moment. So just allowing your mind to settle for just a moment. And part of what helps that is allowing the eyes to close, just noticing. And then just coming into breath, just briefly. Just noticing the breath rising and falling. And calling to mind a difficult experience that you've had in the last week. I know that this shouldn't be difficult for many of you. Again, it's on that 3 to 4 scale, so we're not going for the worst thing that's ever happened. We're not going for a 10. We're just going for that 3 to 4 level, where you notice a little bit of the stress generating in the body because you're calling that into awareness. And now just internally begin naming the primary emotion that you're feeling around this experience. Is it anxiety, sadness, grief, anger, frustration, embarrassment? And internally, just like you would acknowledge for a pet, a loved one, someone very dear to you, just begin naming the emotion. Anxiety. 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 And now locating in the body where you feel that sensation most strongly. Just noticing the sensations. And if you wish, you can place a hand over that part of the body to just be with the sensations. This is that relationship. It's already starting. And then internally repeating after me out loud if it's helpful to you. This is a moment of discomfort, or this is a moment of pain, or this is a moment of suffering. Whatever word feels right for you in acknowledging that. And now repeating after me again. Suffering is a part of the human condition. I know I'm not alone. And now internally asking yourself, what is it that my emotions or my body need to be with this difficult emotion? So like in my example for anxiety, I might need a sense of peace or courage or love. And so internally, you can just repeat the word slowly, gently, peace, peace, peace. Or you can imagine a being, perhaps from your spiritual tradition, that naturally represents this thing that you need or the comfort that you need. Or a bright, warm light, perhaps breathing that into the body. Or sometimes like a color that feels soothing or comforting to you. So like I feel a deep connection to the color pink. And so sometimes I think of love and kindness as kind of this pink light. And I just imagine breathing that into the body. Now just allowing your awareness to come back into the room. So what did you notice during the practice? Just checking in with yourself. What did I notice? Just anything. My mind was wandering, or I got caught up in thinking about that thing that was difficult in the last week, or I started thinking about the list of things that I needed to do. Or perhaps noticing that you were able to focus sometimes and it felt good to just acknowledge that you were hurting in some way. Or to hear your own voice actually recognizing that you're having a hard time. And now checking in with the body, just noticing how you feel in this moment. Is there a sense of difficulty or still a sense of tension, or is there a sense of warmth and relaxation? You know, for me, for instance, I feel the warmth of my hand still there, even if my hand isn't there any longer. I'm feeling that sense of connection, of a little bit more ease in my body, a little bit more kind of settling and warm and fuzzy. And yet I feel more awake, right? So whatever your experience is okay. Just noticing, has anything shifted or changed for you? Would this be helpful as an informal experience to be walking down the street or in your home to just say, oh, I'm feeling sad today. And that feels like a heaviness, and this is a moment of suffering. But I know that all of humanity right now is experiencing some difficult emotion, and so I know I'm not alone. May I be kind to myself, right? So that's about how long it can take to do this very informal practice, right? So these practices that I'm sharing with you today are out of a teacher and researcher that I follow, who's one of my initial teachers in mindfulness and compassion. Her name is Kristen Neff. She co-teaches and developed the program of mindful self-compassion with Christopher Germer out of Harvard Medical School. So that last practice, the self-compassion break, is an informal practice that has been researched along with a bunch of other practices and is really lovely and helpful. Um, and so now we're going to do a second practice that's based on a long tradition within the Buddhist psychology. You can Google it online through just through Google, just yin yang breathing. It's down at the bottom of the slide. Breathing, Yin Yang Breathing by Kristen Neff. And there are a number of different ones out there. So I've adapted mine a little bit because I feel like certain language is really important to my clients, my patients, and my students. So starting out, what I want you to do in mindfulness practice and formal meditation, what you want is the body to be as much in alignment as possible, kind of this uprightness. And that's whether or not you're laying down or sitting up or even standing, that you're getting the upper body in this kind of straight line. You're allowing the hands to rest, and I'll guide you with hand placement, but you can even, for even a moment, allow the hands to rest over the heart or just down on the lap in some way. You want the, the head and the chin to not be too far down and not too far up, because that, you can hear that in my voice, it kind of cuts off the airway. So you want this gentle tuck as though you're looking down at kind of like a 45-degree angle. And along the lines of eyes, you can allow them to be open, what I call warrior eyes, in practice, where you have that 45-degree angle and you're softening a gaze down toward just a general area. You're not focusing on a particular point, or you can allow the eyes to close, okay? And as much as possible, we're going to have the shoulders be a little bit down and back if you can, and and just allowing yourself to be as comfortable as you can in that position. Again, if you can't hold still, I don't want you to worry about that. I want you to move if you need to move, shift if you need to shift. If your body needs to tap or engage in rocking or whatever you need, just allowing yourself to be in that space, but just being aware of what you're doing while you're doing it. Make sure that you add that into your practice. All right. So allowing the body to rest in this sense of comfort and just noticing the body for a moment, allowing it to soften, allowing the eyes to soften down, allowing the eyes to close, allowing them to become restful in the eye sockets, allowing the jaw to become slack. And then begin by coming into 3 deep cleansing breaths, just at your own pace. Noticing the nourishment of the breath coming in, and the soothing and ease of the breath going back out. Then allowing the breath to fall into its own natural rhythm. There's no need to make the breath do anything in particular. You're just allowing the breath to gently rise and fall, just as it would when you're not paying attention to it. Just like you're watching a pet or a loved one sleeping, just kind of leaning in to the breath, just like you would lean into this loved one. And as you continue breathing in and back out, bringing both hands to the heart center. And as you're breathing in and back out, begin focusing primarily on the in-breath. Just noticing how good it feels to breathe in. And if you're having difficulty with breathing, it's okay to just breathe as best you can. And internally, just begin repeating the words, loving, connected, presence. loving, connected presence. Allowing sounds to come and go. The mind will wander. When this happens, just with kindness and gentleness, coming back to the words. If you wish, you can also view this breathing in as a kind of warm light, breathing into the heart on each in-breath. Loving, connected presence. And this compassion that we're giving to ourselves right now is affectionate, comforting, nurturing, calm, and content. And it's the intention of these things, not necessarily that you'll feel them. If these are a part of your values, to be loving, connected, and present with yourself and with the people in your life, then just allow yourself to just repeat the words, letting go of having to feel a particular way. Loving, connected presence. And now begin allowing the breath to flow in awareness equally in and back out. Taking deeper breaths if you need. And then focusing primarily on the out breath. Allowing the hands to become open in the lap or outward. Focusing on the out breath as though the breath is moving through you and out through the heart. And on each out breath, repeating the words, fierce, powerful, life force, the energy of the body, the life in the body, fierce, powerful, life force. And this compassion is protective. It motivates us, supports us with strength. It's expressive, confident, and sets boundaries. And you can imagine this fierce, powerful life force as a kind of bright, brilliant light moving in and through the body, perhaps from the spine upward and upward through the top of the head or out through the heart or both. Whatever imagery works for you. You can even imagine an image, a being, a light or color. And now allowing the breath to move into a natural rhythm in and back out, paying attention to both the in and the out breath equally, and bringing the hands into a position that feels balanced to you. Whatever feels right for you is what I want you to move into. Breathing, loving, connected presence in. Fierce, powerful life force back out. Nurturing in. protective, back out. Affection in, expression, back out. Comfort in, confidence, back out. Calmness in, boundary setting, back out. Contentment in, confidence, back out. And now just allowing the breath to fall into its own natural rhythm. Just noticing how the body feels in this moment. Allowing yourself to feel the way that you're feeling, to be just as you are, with no need to make it any different. Allowing yourself to just be. And slowly, gently, as you're ready, allowing the eyes to open once again. So again, just reflecting on this practice. What did you notice during the practice? What are you noticing about how you're feeling right now? What are you noticing in the body, or that sense of emotions, those ways that we feel emotion in the body? And again, has anything shifted or changed in some way? So I've had different clients and students notice reactivity show up around the use of the word nurturing, right? Of being tender or kind or gentle to themselves or even to others, or some men having an adverse feeling to the word fierce in some way, of kind of wanting to reject that sense of like being the fierce tough guy, of being a more gentle human being. Or on the other end, women feeling like they don't have a right to feel fierce and powerful, and setting limits, right? That there are certain prescribed roles that we have to follow, right? And so this practice is meant to help support us in balancing the two aspects of compassion. The one side is very nurturing and loving and tender and just connected and kind of feeling safe. And the other one rises up as an intention rather than reactivity, but setting limits and boundaries of being able to say, I need to be motivated and protective in this moment, that it's okay to be in whatever way that you are. And so this provides that sense of practicing that balanced awareness, that it's okay to be both, and that sometimes one is called for more than the other. And this is particularly helpful, I think, for in the last several years, kind of the Me Too movement, which is part of the reason Kristin Neff began researching this practice, was to support women in being okay with being nurturing and connected and caretakers and all of those roles that have a kind of tradition to them. But it's also obviously okay, and no one needs to give you permission to be fierce and powerful and connected. The same thing with men or anyone in between, that it's okay to be a balance of nurturing, connected, and emotionally vulnerable, and also to be fierce and powerful without having to hurt anyone. So finding that balance within the practice, okay? So practice resources, I have a couple of practices at my website at emfm.space. Kristen Neff's website is www.selfcompassion.org with a hyphen in between. And she has a number of free guided meditations on her website, as well as videos about mindful self-compassion. Chris Germer, his website, also free guided meditations that you can watch online or download them for yourself. And then the Center for MSC, where I trained for teacher training, has free guided meditations as well, free for download. And so it doesn't require a lot of money to do this. And this will also obviously be archived at the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation website. So I just want to say a heartfelt thank you for joining me today for Mindful Compassion Hour. Please join us for next session, where we will continue cultivating the practices of compassion. We'll also repeat a lot of information, because a part of practice is repetition. We only learn how to do things through repetition. It's how we learn, it's how we study, through all of our schooling that we've ever been through. When we study for a test, we are studying and memorizing. And so repetition is our friend. It helps us to stay on course and connected. So these Mindful Compassion Hour presentations are recorded and archived, so you can access them by going to www.nwpf.org. It's been my honor, and with a great sense of gratitude. I've loved being with you here, even though it's pre-recorded. And so may you be free from inner and outer harm. May you be happy, peaceful, and free. May you be kind, loving, and forgiving toward your imperfections and the imperfections of others. May you be as healthy as possible and live with ease. And may you be free from suffering and experience joy wherever it may be found. I'll see you next time.